Hey everybody, and welcome to the channel, and welcome to the very first episode of Battling the Backlog. Basically, if you've seen my game haul videos, I buy a lot of video games, but I haven't been playing a lot of video games. So I started this series as a chance to make myself play more games. So hopefully that's what it leads to, and so far it seems to be working. I start out with a game from my childhood that I never quite beat, and being a big fan of Ratchet & Clank and Spyro the Dragon, whenever I saw this one, it just kind of stuck out to me. And that game is Scalar for the PlayStation 2, GameCube, and Xbox. Scalar was released in October 2004 by Artificial Mind and Movement, better known as Behavior Interactive, and it perfectly blends in with all the action-adventure 3D platformers of the PS2 era. I'm not going to spend a ton of time on the plot because it seems like the developers and writers didn't really think that far into it either. But long story short, you play as Bobby Scalar Jenkins, an animal rights activist really fascinated with lizards that's being interrogated by what turns out to be reptilians in disguise. Those reptilians in disguise live in an alternate dimension where they want to take lizard eggs from the human dimension, turn them into a lizard army, and then come back to the human dimension and take it over. And they're interrogating Scalar because he really likes lizards. It's also quickly mentioned that there's a whole multiverse, but that's really quickly mentioned and then quickly forgotten. Honestly, a lot of it is poorly explained in the opening scene, and then it's all just an afterthought as the game plays out. But during all that process, human Bobby is turned into the blue lizard on the cover and decides to take up the name Scalar and jumps into a portal that opened up into the lizard world. And then he's got to find all the lizard eggs to prevent there from being a lizard army. That's a plot if I've ever heard one. From there, Scalar meets Leon, another lizard, and his repidactyl named Reppy, and Leon and Reppy take Scalar from world to world as they go and rescue the lizard eggs. From there, you collect 20 eggs across 10 different levels before heading off to fight the big baddie named Luger, where you then steal his controller to open a portal back to the human dimension and return the lizard eggs safely. Moving on to the gameplay, it mostly compares to both Jak and Daxter and Ratchet & Clank while taking inspirations from both of them. And while it is kind of a watered-down version of these, it's still pretty good. Scalar controls pretty well, although he can be slippery at times, which can cause issues since this is a platformer. A lot of the edges of the platforms are a little rounded, and with his slipperiness, you seem to just slide right off. Scalar can ride vines, which is similar to rail grinding in Ratchet & Clank. He can also turn invisible and crawl past dangerous enemies and environmental hazards as well. He can also scale up walls, similar to using the magnet boots in Ratchet & Clank. Honestly, the vine riding is pretty fun. The speed varies across the course of the thing instead of staying at a steady constant, and with all the ups and downs and different obstacles that you have to avoid, it makes it a challenging and fun experience all at the same time. You can definitely tell that the vine riding is something that the devs really took their time with. The combat does feel pretty good, but it can get a little stale after a while, especially since there's so much of the forced combat thrown in. Scalar has like a 3-hit punch combo, he's also got a ground and pound thing that he can do, but the most fun and most satisfying combat is his tongue attack that just whips out and easily takes care of small enemies. The tongue attack can also stun larger enemies while also break environmental things that you pass along the way. It's a simple form of combat, but it is effective, and when you combine both the tongue attack and the combat attacks to take down larger enemies, it is pretty satisfying. Scalar also has this lightning bomb ability that I personally didn't use too often on my playthrough. You charge it up by riding the vines, and then you use it to stun enemies, and you use it to break special environmental hazards that has one of the collectibles in it that we'll get to a little bit later. I mentioned it earlier, but there's also a camouflage ability to sneak past certain enemies that have an insta-kill to them, and also sneak past certain environmental hazards along the way. You have to buy this ability, and it is required, but that's not really too bad because you have plenty of the money type thing, which we'll get to later, to spend once you get there. The camouflage sections are pretty easy, but slightly tense. I found it more fun to time my jumps just perfectly right and skip through the whole thing. Exploits. One of the main features of the game is that Scalar can transform into other creatures that he defeats along the way. These transformations feel more like the other playable characters in Spyro Year of the Dragon, each one having their own ability and their own area to specialize in. For example, early on you can transform into a Bakuldon, and that allows you to throw bombs to open doors, take out large enemies, flip switches, and it's a pretty useful power-up. The next power-up you get is called a Croc, which you turn into a giant ball and speed around levels. This power-up actually has its own whole level dedicated to time trials, which are pretty fun but a little stale. Scalar can also transform into a Fruzzard, which is more like Agent 9. He's the first-person shooter projectile firing power-up in the game. There's also a Swoom, which allows Scalar to swim underwater. And the most forgettable one is the Doozum, which allows Scalar to fly. As cool as some of these transformations and abilities are, they are kind of lackluster. There's not many opportunities to use them in the game, and for instance, the flying power-up and the swimming power-up are only used in the level that you get them. Each level you can either have no transformations or just one, and the one the game picks out for you to use. It's a shame about the underwater power-up because the swimming controls were actually pretty nice, and the underwater areas were quite pretty. Then at the end of the game, it really heavily relies on that shooting power-up used over and over. It almost feels like the devs were running out of time and they just decided to put all their eggs into that basket, and it kind of gets stale because the shooting doesn't really mesh with the rest of the platforming of the game. All the other power-ups and transformations use platforming as their core thing, but with the shooting one, you just shoot your targets from far away and don't really have to deal with anything. I think it would have been great if you could use any power-up in any level and almost treat it like Spyro Year of the Dragon, where you see an underwater area and you're like, I don't know how to access that, and then you unlock the swimming ability and you're like, oh, I need to go back, use the swimming ability to get another collectible. But the problem is the game doesn't really have that many collectibles. There's only 2 collectibles, the 20 lizard eggs that are required to beat the game, and then crystal gems. Crystal gems are worth 500 clockies, which are pretty similar to bolts. You use those to buy power-ups from Leon and Reppy at the end or beginning of each level. Collect the crystal gems, then you spend them for power-ups, and that's pretty much it. There's not even a sound or something to let you know that you got one of these collectibles, and they're all just kind of hidden throughout the environment. There's really no special hidden area to do. Occasionally you'll have to throw a bomb at the enemy, and then once the bomb disappears, there's a crystal gem behind it. Lizard eggs are at least satisfying to collect. There's a unique animation at the end of each one that Scalar will do. He'll either punch on it or spin on it or dance on it or something. It's unique, it's fun, and it's interesting. With the crystal gems, you just get it. Using the clockies, you can buy multiple bomb slots, increase your health, increase your damage, increase the length of your camouflage. That's pretty much it. Through my playthrough, I just increased my health and my damage, and that was more than enough to get me through the game. You also get plenty of clockies along the way, so you don't have to worry about buying one thing and sacrificing another. You can just buy pretty much whatever you want, whenever you want, kind of making it pointless. One thing I did find unique was that you could spend the clockies and unlock a photo mode, which is pretty interesting for a game that came out in 2004. Photo modes are pretty much a guarantee in any game today, but for a PS2 title, it was pretty interesting to see, and it kind of caught me off guard, and it was pretty fun to play around with too. Since we're about 3/4 of the way through the discussion, I guess that's when we should probably start talking about the negatives, as about 3/4 of the way through the game, it's pretty much a bore. The biggest issue is that the enemies become pretty repetitive. They're the same enemies that you've been fighting the entire game, and they don't gain any health or get more difficult. The game just throws more of them at you. And honestly, it is pretty difficult because having multiple enemies shoot different projectiles at you, you can't really get out of the way, and your attacks stay the same the whole game. Common occurrence throughout the game are these arenas that just send wave after wave of enemy at you, and these get pretty dull and repetitive really quickly. Eventually, they just become downright tedious, and hopefully you've increased your health along the way because you're going to take too many hits from too many enemies to deal with at once. Hey everybody, Editing Lucas here. I realized I forgot to talk about the boss fights, and they're not great. Well, the first one's great. It uses the Bakugan power-up to break switches to then attack the boss with the bombs. So the whole fight you're flipping between Scalar and the Bakugan, and you're using the stuff that you learned from playing the game, and it makes it a pretty fun and entertaining boss fight. The penultimate boss fight is pretty good too. You fight Boot Camp, and you use the Vine Riding to move around platforms and avoid his attacks. The fight itself can be a little cheap at times. Early on in the fight, he blows at you and it doesn't really do anything, but later in the fight, he blows at you and it can push you off the ledge. And if you fall off the ledge, that's an insta-death and you just have to start all over. So the first time, it pretty much catches you off guard and you're set for a second round. The second boss fight is actually 2 boss fights. It's pretty weird. You basically just run right and do more of the arenas that are already starting to get redundant from playing the game. The third boss fight is the worst boss fight. You fight this crab and you're doing a shooter, you're doing a rail shooter, and it's just not fun. It clashes with the concepts of the rest of the game. You have to shoot really tiny targets on this crab while also shooting all these drones that are coming at you, and it's really, honestly difficult. There's just too much going on to follow along with, and it takes forever. So when you die, you have to start over and do the whole thing again, which just makes it even more aggravating. The final boss fight is just lackluster. You fight Luger and you use the electric bomb power-ups that you've had since the beginning of the game. I also forgot about the few turret sections that are in the game, and again, this is a concept that just clashes with the rest of the mechanics of the game. I don't know why the devs wanted to switch into a shooter halfway through. It just doesn't make any sense. The platforming is the most fun that the game has, and then you take it away. Not to mention the turret sections are just so slow and they just last a long time and they're not really difficult. It just takes forever and it's definitely filler to pad out the gameplay time, I guess. The other big issue is that the story is just pretty bland and lackluster, so here's your spoil warning in case you plan on picking up this game. During the game, Leon comes to the realization that he is indeed Bobby Jenkins' dad, who apparently left at some point, but it's never really mentioned why or where or any sort of reason behind it. And honestly, it would be a pretty fine twist if it wasn't painted so obvious early on. I mean, the first time you meet Leon, he goes, "My name's Leon," and Scalar follows up with, "Huh, that was my dad's name." It would also be more fine if they spent more time together in the cutscenes actually growing their relationship and just instead of seeming like we're going from point A to point B. The ending of the game also leaves little to be desired. In standard fashion, Leon sacrifices himself so that Scalar and all the eggs can make it through the portal, because Bobby dropped one, and that's it. The portal closes, Leon's left in the lizard world, Bobby yells, "Dad!" and then the credits roll. That's it. Collect all the crystal gems in the game. There is another ending that is labeled as cheesy ending that Hollywood would have given you, and honestly, it's not worth it. The ending turns out that Leon never left at all, and he's got the control to open the portal, and it doesn't make any sense. It's just kind of rushed together. I think the levels look great. I think they're visually designed well, and the colors pop and look great for a PS2 title. The enemies are designed pretty well, although they are repetitive. But I just want to hit the point again that I wish there was more to do in this game. I wish there was a reason to go back and visit other levels other than the pointless crystal gems. Like maybe if they would add another collectible, like baby lizards, or even just added more lizard eggs in general, and let you go back and use the other transformations, it could have made the game feel more full. Like if this game had the Spyro 3 design where, you see the Sergeant Bird portal, and then you unlock Sergeant Bird and go back, I think that would have been great. It would have gave so much more life to this game, but it's just kind of bland and boring and repetitive by the time you get to the end of it. Just wish you could use the special abilities anywhere in the game. It would expand the level from 2 to 3 paths to giving you plenty of reasons to play more. Overall, Scalar is a pretty fun game, but as the game progresses, it slowly loses its interesting factors. And every time you get something interesting, it's never mentioned again. With a lackluster conclusion to the story and a final boss that just doesn't really fit the role, the game kind of ends with a thud. And with the lack of collectibles, the replayability of previous levels isn't really there. I think this game could have been really, really good, but it ultimately just falls short. Compares to those instances where you're really inspired to do something and you put a lot of time, love, and effort into the beginning of it, but eventually you lose that inspiration and you just kind of quickly slap something together just to finish it quickly. That being said, it is still pretty fun, and I think it's worth checking out, especially if you like those PS2 era 3D action platformer games. Have you played Scalar? If so, let me know what you thought about it in the comments down below. And if you want to check out my personal playthrough of Scalar, there's a link to that playlist down in the description too. Thank you all so much for watching Battling the Backlog. If you enjoyed this, make sure you come check me out over on twitch.tv/OneNameLucas, where I'm playing through games that eventually are probably going to be episodes of this. But yeah, that's going to do it for this one. If you really enjoyed this video, make sure you click the like button down below. It really helps out the channel, and subscribe so you know the next time I release a video. Links to all of my social media accounts are in the description down below. And yeah, that's going to do it for this one. Thank you all so much for watching. I hope you have a good rest of your day. I'll see you all in the next one.